Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Raising Financially Confident Children. I'm Charlotte McGibbon, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this discussion. And joining me today are three incredible panelists. First and foremost, Justin Velasco, partner and co-head of the Cerity Partners Family Office, specializing in estate and tax planning. Then we have PJ DeWars, principal and portfolio manager for our family office team, focusing on custom asset allocation and risk management. And joining us from the Pennsylvania office, Mimi Drake, partner and practice leader on advising clients on investment management and wealth strategy. And in addition to their professional expertise, each of our panelists brings a personal experience to today's discussion. They are all parents themselves, so they understand firsthand how challenging it can be to talk to your children about money in a way that is meaningful and aligned with family values. So their insights today come not only from their work with clients, but also their own experiences navigating these conversations at home. And today's discussion is designed to help you have these conversations at home as well. So whether you have a toddler who's just beginning to understand the concept of money, or a young adult who's stepping into their own financial independence, our goal is to equip you with the tools and resources you need to help them along the way. But before we dig into those tools and resources, let's talk a little bit about why communication matters and the challenges that many families face. As many of you may know, talking to children about money can feel daunting, and the reality is there's no single right way to do it. But what we do know is that open, ongoing conversations can help instill financial responsibility in our loved ones. So with that being said, Justin, can you kick us off today with a few opening remarks and share your perspective on the role of communication and how family values come into play?
Great, absolutely. Thank you, Charlotte. Appreciate that introduction. I'm Justin Velasco, co-head of the Cerity Partner Family Office, and we appreciate you all for taking the time to join us today. We're excited to kick off this first webinar in what we plan to be a series of discussions. And we found that clients value learning best practices across real-world examples. And over the years, we've worked through a number of examples in the family office that we thought it might be of interest to host webinars on topics that we think matter most. And we're happy to take suggestions, so please reach out with any. And we're thrilled to start with a topic that resonates so strongly with our clients: how to raise financially responsible children and how to communicate to your children about wealth. This has been a topic that's been coming up more and more among our clients. And as we've seen that interest grow, and as we've had more and more discussions with not just our clients, but also their kids, we thought it would be helpful to host this webinar to talk through some of the best practices that we'd recommend. And really, when approaching this topic, the first step that we've found to be most helpful is understanding your own financial values and what's important to you. You may innately know your own values, but it becomes much easier to teach your children when you've spent some time shaping and defining your values. To help with this exercise, we often use a worksheet with clients that walks through some key areas, helps them reflect on their values and get them down on paper, and sometimes even video, which is we found helpful to help convey some of the messages. And we found this exercise is a powerful way to shape and solidify your legacy for future generations. And to help visualize this, we have this slide up that outlines some of the key areas that we found helpful to talk through. And some of these areas are span from wealth and legacy goals to financial responsibility, entrepreneurship and giving, and lifestyle and money mindset. And really, before diving into any of these or really thinking too deeply about each of these, I found that these topics often align with three schools of thought. The first school of thought being to really just keep financial details private, and allowing children to find their own way in life, letting them skin their knee, so to speak, while still offering a safety net when needed. Another school of thought is using wealth to subsidize your children's lives, really alleviating financial anxiety, providing security, and giving them a bit of support as they get through life and figure things out on their own. And really, the final school of thought is providing your children with a lump sum to manage, giving them some direct experience to handling wealth themselves. And the right approach isn't a one size fits all. It really depends on your values, your philosophies, but really, most importantly, we found that it depends on your child, and so it could be something different if you have multiple children with different personalities. It might be a little bit of a different approach to each of them. We found that some children, find a strong interest in money and want to manage money themselves, want to open up a brokerage account and practice investing. And for these children, sometimes it works best to go with the last approach, giving them a lump sum. Giving them a lump sum can vary at different points in their life. Of course, you don't want to give them too much, just in case they mess up with something. But maybe when they're in high school, a senior in high school, you give them a small amount of money just to get comfortable with opening up a brokerage account and investing. Maybe when they graduate college, you give them another lump sum of funds to really spend some time going through that and managing it on their own. We found that not all kids have this great interest in managing money in this way, and so sometimes the second school of thought could make more sense. And really, we find that this school of thought is best helpful when your children have a good head on their shoulders when it comes to money, when they understand the importance of the dollar, and really you want to, as mentioned, alleviate some of the stress that might come into play when your children are going out into the workforce and needing to earn money to pay rent, or trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. And sometimes knowing that they have a little bit of a safety net or a subsidy in their life to cover rent could potentially give them some peace of mind to do more what they love in life, if they want to work in not-for-profit, or if they want to be a teacher or something along those lines. Giving them this little bit of subsidy could go a long way in allowing them the freedom to do what they want in life, and not living with some of that anxiety. And the first school of thought, this could be for a child who maybe doesn't have that same mentality as it comes to financial responsibility, and maybe it makes sense to let them skin their knee and figure things out the hard way on their own. Of course, being a safety net for them if they get into trouble. And oftentimes, clients might have grown up in this sort of way as well, and have found that they've became the people that they are, having gone through things in that way. So each of these schools of thought have their pros and cons, and each of them could have their values and benefits with your children. And so working through these thoughts and thinking through these thoughts can really allow you to figure out what is most important to you, and then therefore the values that you want to pass on to your children. Now, oftentimes we don't have the luxury of thinking through all of these items and sitting through this exercise that we work on with clients and the worksheet. And so conversations with your children may not wait. And so with that in mind, we wanted to highlight some common challenges that families face and best practices to navigating them. The first one is probably the most common one, where the money is taboo mindset, and oftentimes many families have grown up in this sort of environment where you just don't talk about money. It's just not something that's brought up, and so you don't talk about it with your kids. And we certainly find that avoiding the topic altogether isn't the right answer, isn't the best answer. And really the best approach is finding ways to normalize these financial conversations in everyday life. Money should be comfortable, ongoing discussions, not a one-time event as you're maybe going to the grocery store and purchasing things, or going out to dinner and guessing how much the check is. Just finding small examples in life to just bring up money and just have it be something that is more commonplace, so that when you do talk to your kids about money and more serious topics about money, it's not so taboo. Another challenge that we often hear about is, do you disclose dollar amounts? And I highly recommend not disclosing dollar amounts. It's typically not something that's necessary or important to sharing values. Rather, instead of not disclosing any dollar amounts at all, I would recommend taking this from the other side, taking this from your child's side, in terms of dollar amounts that are relevant to them. If you're talking with a young child and they're looking to get a bike, you can talk to them about how much that bike costs and how much money they might need to save up for that bike. Or older children who might be looking to purchase their first home and needing a down payment, for example, and talking to your kids about budgeting and saving up for that down payment, or potentially helping them with that down payment. But really talking about expenses and dollar amounts that are relevant and important to the things that are in their life. Another big challenge that we hear from clients is just, lacking the financial literacy to talk to their clients about all of the important areas: retirement savings, tax planning, 401ks, IRAs, a number of topics that not all clients are well versed in. This is definitely an area where we would recommend leveraging us as a resource, and speaking to us, inviting us to speak with your kids. And oftentimes we have had discussions directly with clients' children at all different ages, and talking through presentations and the most important things at that point in their life. And so this is an easily overcomable challenge by leveraging your Cerity Partners advisor to talk through some of this. The last two, avoiding difficult discussions and infrequent conversations, again goes to this idea of communication, and really all of it is addressed with being comfortable talking through things, talking about death and talking about inheritance, and not from the point of view of something that's sad or such, but a way of life, and that you're there for them. And as you're having these conversations early on in life, and as you're make it more commonplace and comfortable to talk to your kids about money on more day-to-day things, it becomes a lot easier to talk to them about bigger picture things, and talking to them about budgeting or buying a home, receiving inheritance, things of that nature. So by recognizing these challenges and addressing them proactively rather than avoiding them, can really start to set the stage for confident, informed financial decision making across generations. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Mimi to talk about why some of these conversations are worth having, and why it matters most.
Thank you, Justin. And I'm actually going to start by turning to the Oracle of Omaha. So Warren Buffett talked about communication specifically with kids when he said, develop the right habits early, create a culture of learning, continual learning, and an open mind. And he's famous for his quotes, and one of them that I really like is, the more you learn, the more you earn. And kids of almost all ages can relate to that. So with that in mind, we often talk at Cerity Partners about, regardless of when wealth is created, whether it's brand new or it's multi-generational, wealth is an exciting, unfinished story. It's a story about a family's values and vision and legacy. And this communication really helps to make sure that story continues on for generations to come. So specifically, we all have heard the stats that about roughly 2/3 of families lose their wealth in the second generation and something like 90% by the third generation. So good communication obviously is really important in that. In fact, usually families lose their wealth not from bad investments, but because of a lack of communication and financial education. So we can't emphasize enough how important this is. In addition to creating a legacy and helping that story continue, it really aligns family values. It helps to strengthen what the family's shared principles are and what the family believes in and is trying to accomplish. Contrary to popular opinion, we often think, as Justin mentioned, communication is difficult, but in fact, it's the opposite. It helps to reduce family conflict and uncertainty. It creates a culture of trust and understanding, and it actually helps to build financial literacy and stewardship. So children of families who have created some wealth are actually equipped to manage this wealth and become stewards of that wealth. And they learn early on through good communication what that means to be a steward, either with their siblings, with their parents or grandparents or whoever it is, or their children to come. So we can't emphasize enough that good communication is actually an exciting opportunity and can really pave the way for a wonderful family legacy.
Well, thank you, Mimi and Justin. Those were certainly powerful insights, and it's clear that breaking the silence around money is key to financial literacy. So now let's get into the how, those practical ways to structure these conversations. And for today's event, we've thoughtfully aligned core financial concepts into 4 main age ranges. We have young children, elementary to preteen, teenagers, and young adults. So Justin, I'm going to kick it back to you to start with the younger ages. What are some effective ways to introduce these concepts to children under the age of 12?
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of the days when my daughter, who's now 17, was that young age of 3, 4, 5, where I remember oftentimes hours of make believe and playing, role play where she has a coffee shop and she's selling me a cup of coffee, or a restaurant, or we have all different sorts of make believe items where she's selling me the coffee, and really using that as an opportunity to talk about money, and that she's not just giving me the coffee, but she's selling me the coffee, and oftentimes I'd pull out a dollar bill or a quarter, and actually show her and give her the money. It all sounds rather basic, but just getting comfortable with money at this early age, knowing what money is really in and of itself is important. Seeing the money, as the second point says, making money tangible. And actually holding that dollar bill, holding the quarters, seeing all the different bills, all the different coins, and then really encouraging some saving of that. And we had a few different piggy banks, and I remember we had a really fun piggy bank. You put the money in, and it did a whole bunch of things. And so she was oftentimes excited to get money for different chores, or we would ask her what she wanted, if she wanted to do certain things, and require her to clean up or after herself, and get paid some amount of money, which really became helpful as we're walking around the stores, and we'd find early on, it's I want that, and you're wanting everything. But then at a certain point, it's okay, we're going to give you $20 to buy whatever you want, but within the $20. And it was amazing how we saw her mindset change, because now as she's walking around, I want that, it's, oh, how much is that? And then she'd make a pile of things, after the shopping spree, and try to figure out what she could afford within the $20. She could either buy something large, or she could spread it out among a number of things. And so I found that to be extremely helpful in having her understand the importance of money, and then saving up for things, because it's not just about this instant gratification, but also the importance of delayed gratification, and saving up for certain things. So she loved American Girl dolls, and they're not the cheapest. And so she would oftentimes put money aside in her piggy bank, and it was a fun activity every weekend. We'd empty the piggy bank and count up how much money she had saved, and then that would encourage her to do more chores. And she would ask us, "What, Mom, Dad, what can I do to get paid? I want to continue to save up money." So, while it seems like a very young age and an age that it seems difficult to talk to your kids about money, that there are a lot of opportunities to bring up the concept of money and make it something that is more comfortable for them to understand and know what to do with. So that's what I would say are kind of the most important things at that young age. And as kids enter their preteen years, their relationship with money starts to shift. So PJ, I'll turn it over to you to talk about how to build on those early lessons and introduce more structured concepts.
Thanks, Justin. This is a perfect slide for me because my children are 8 and 10 years old. So lots of opportunities for learning here because they're so curious and eager to earn. You really start to see significant money start to come their way through birthday checks or maybe assign chores, maybe have an allowance. My children, when the weather's nice, love having a lemonade stand, right? So to me, that lemonade stand example, not only is it a way to learn about money, but it's really a great opportunity to learn about business, right? Because to me, like understanding business, understanding how the world works is an invaluable skill. It helps kids through life in terms of understanding what incentives people might have if they're trying to, if they're trying to get something from them or if they have kind of a hidden agenda. But understanding business and the flow of money is such an important skill. And this lemonade stand example is kind of perfect, right? Because you can also learn about marketing, you can learn about accounting, you can assign roles to your friends. So I'm a huge fan of that. And then as they earn this money, they really need to think about, okay, what am I going to do with it? Do I want to donate some money to charity? My kids have donated money to the neighborhood block party and to a pet shelter in town. How much do I want to save? How much do I want to spend? Right. And the spending decision is once again such a great learning opportunity because the more decisions you can give your kid to think about, well, what has value? What do I want to spend my money on? The better, right? So my son had a birthday recently and he has Amazon gift cards that he knows that, okay, I have a certain amount of money to spend. Let me add some stuff to the cart on Amazon, stuff that we never got to do when we were kids. But nowadays it's like, okay, you add stuff to the cart. And it's great because like Justin said, they need to think about, okay, well, I only have a certain amount to spend. What's worth it to me, right? And then beyond the spending, the investing conversation, this is where we start to introduce concepts of investing. And now for me, it's a really easy transition because kids come home from school and their teacher or their friends have asked them, what do your parents do for work, right? So they come home and they ask me, well, Dad, so what does it mean to be a portfolio manager? What are stocks and bonds? And it can be a tricky conversation, but when you have that business background of the lemonade stand, suddenly you can explain, okay, well, this is how a business gets started and it needs to be financed, right? They need to raise money. They can raise, equity or they can borrow debt. And so all these conversations, to the point earlier about communication, these conversations happen and kids start to understand how money flows and how the world works. And this is a great age for them to learn. And then going into the teen years, we can kind of talk about a few more real world examples, right? Because now, my daughter in particular has been begging for, the ability to work, right? Or to go babysit and make more money and start a business. And it's tough because you don't want to discourage them, but when they're young, they're not quite ready to do certain things. But now as teenagers, they can go babysit, they can go shovel the sidewalk or walk the dog for the neighbor and then obviously in the later teen years do even more significant work. So this is once again, more opportunities to learn. And then that investing and spending conversation, once again, new decisions, spending your money on going out with friends or going to Starbucks, as as the young kids like to do these days, or we're going to the movies or something like that. It's really, once again, more autonomy and more responsibility really helps them grow. And I would encourage kids these days, definitely teens, to really actually make investing decisions. This is advice I've always given to college kids, but I think it's relevant for teenagers as well. But once you're managing money and making decisions about, individual stocks or thinking about asset classes, it provides a whole different motivation for learning, right? And it makes learning more interesting because now all of a sudden you're thinking about, oh, what are the trends in which companies are doing well? What does it mean that the Fed is changing interest rates? Like, what do I need to learn about to really help me make more money, which is motivating to a lot of kids. So, once again, great age to really bring them into the fold of what it's like to be a young adult, and introducing concepts that they're going to have to deal with, like the idea of taxes, right? The idea of a credit card and a credit score. These are real world examples that you can start to introduce as teenagers. And one way to do that, which we're considering for my daughter right now, is this idea of the green light debit card. So it's a service where kids can spend money on a debit card, and then through an app they can track how much money they're saving. They can actually make investments. They can do a lot of things. So once again, some great opportunities for learning at this stage.
Thanks, BJ, and thanks, Justin, as well. Certainly clear that we should never underestimate the power of piggy banks and lemonade stands. And I also think it was great that you brought up this idea of introducing an entrepreneurial mindset in our children. So with all of that in mind, it's really about making money feel real through play, hands-on activities, everyday experiences. But Mimi, let's shift over to young adults now, because at these ages, kids are dealing with slightly more complex financial decisions. They're preparing for college, or maybe they're starting their first career. Maybe they're opening their first 401k. So what are some of the best ways to guide them through this type of topic?
Charlotte, you're so right. When children become young adults, that is when it gets real, when conversations about money and wealth get real. As you said, maybe they have their first job. Maybe they're involved in financing college, whether it's student loans, or they're involved in discussions if the family is sponsoring that. Or maybe they're dabbling in investments in a more real way at this stage. So this is a particularly exciting group to work with. And we've seen a few ideas work. The first is, this is an interesting time to introduce children to the family financial structure as appropriate. So whether it's financial advisors, accountants, attorneys, if there's a family office involved, introduces the children to these important part of your team. Often what we do is, when children get their first job and they get the first paycheck, it's daunting. And that's a time that we often get involved, and we have conversations with the children of our clients. And those are fascinating. It's really eye-opening. Who are all these FICA and all these people who are taking my money? And we really break it down. And not only are they introduced to taxes, but then it also opens up a conversation around spending and budget, and how this paycheck will be broken out. So that's a terrific way to get them used to working with advisors, knowing who to go to with questions, even steering them back if it's a job to their company's HR department for questions. But it really engages them. We also, once they're comfortable with us, we encourage them to talk to us about what they're learning in their classes. Whether it's economics or finance classes, we do not write papers for them, but we enjoy talking to them. And sometimes it's just nice to have someone other than parents to talk about these topics, and they can ask any questions in a safe space. So that's one idea. Another idea, we talked earlier about how communication seems to be something that people traditionally steered away from, but we would encourage you to let your children, particularly your young adults, observe your conversations about money, even the stressful ones, whether you're making decisions, whether you're weighing something, a trade-off. Let them observe the conversation process, the dynamics, And also, if there are any mistakes made around money, we think it's equally important to let them observe not just what the mistake was, but how the conversation evolved around that and how the learning was summarized. So let them listen in maybe more than you would have thought comfortable. And one thing I've done with my young adult children is model the trade-offs. So should we get the car or go on the vacation? Things like that, where in truth, maybe the decision is already made, but it's letting them see the process with the family and making them feel part of it so that they feel some ownership and they have that sense of proportion and wealth. And then start to discuss your investments. Maybe there's an investment that resonates with them because it's in a sector that they understand, and ask their opinion on it, especially if it's a stock that's having a bumpy period or it's having a particularly strong period. Ask their thoughts. You'd be surprised what we can learn from the kids around their insights, and they're often additive to the conversation, but really engage them. And even if they're quiet, they are certainly listening. So for all of the decisions you're making and the challenging ones, where appropriate, let them observe. And then finally, we talked about this earlier, but this is a really good time to let them dip their toe in the water around investments. And I think, Justin, I like the analogy you use of skinning their knee. This is when it starts to hurt a little bit more. Maybe they make an investment with their savings and it tanks. While that's painful in the moment, it could be one of the most important lessons that they learn in their lives. And so we do encourage that. Again, whether it's a stock, something they're interested in, we often say for children who maybe aren't quite as interested, maybe there's a story or a sector in the news that they would just like to follow, right? It's overwhelming to say, read the Wall Street Journal from cover to cover, sometimes at this age. But maybe there's a sector or a particular theme or an event that's unfolding where you encourage them to follow that all the way through and have that be the basis of the conversation. But this is a really good time for them to take, even in very small amounts, there are plenty of ways of doing this, small amounts of money to invest. That conversation then becomes very real. So this is a wonderfully important time to have these conversations and to communicate and to let them really start engaging in the wealth that they're creating, but also in your family wealth and the broader conversations.
Thanks, Mimi. You brought up some great points there. And I love this idea of getting children involved in the stock market and with investing a little bit earlier on in life. I know for me personally, I didn't get involved in stocks and bonds until I was in the industry. And I often think about maybe I would have been a little more successful by now if I had started earlier. So I think that's a great point. And there's obviously been a lot of great concepts and ideas shared so far. And I think it's also important to highlight how many incredible resources are out there for families, especially through technology today. So we plan to share this list of recommendations with all of you after the event, but I just wanted to give our audience a sneak peek. Some of these resources we've actually touched on a little bit today, such as Greenlight. I believe PJ brought this up. It's a wonderful tool because kids can practice budgeting and they can also have their very own debit card. So again, it's making it real and you're also having some control over it still, right? So parents, just definitely take some time to check these out after the event. We'll be sharing them along with the recording. But with that being said, I think we're ready to dive into our Q&A session. We received several great questions from our audience ahead of time, and we're going to address the most common ones today. If you didn't get a chance to submit a question, or if you'd like to submit a question after the fact, feel free to give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. And speaking of questions, I really appreciate our first one. So I'm just going to take a moment to stop sharing the slides, and we'll just talk through some of the questions for today. All right. So Justin, this first one, I'm actually going to pass off to you. I love this question because it actually addresses an age group that we didn't get to discuss just yet today. And I actually feel like this could be its own webinar entirely. So first question is, I have adult children over the age of 30. How do I bring them into the conversation?
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting question, and funny as we're preparing for this discussion about preparing your children for money and wealth, you don't necessarily think about adult children and grown children, but oftentimes it becomes harder and more important to speak with your adult children. Oftentimes they already have their own values in life, and they already have their own principles, and some of them might be fiscally responsible, some of them might not be fiscally responsible. And so oftentimes as parents, we want to eventually bring our kids under the hood and have them understand the wealth that they're going to receive. But I would highly recommend doing this a little bit cautiously, kind of easing into things. Of course, as they get older, they'll start to realize how much money you have as a family. The home values are on Zillow these days, so it becomes pretty clear in terms of the wealth that the family has. But it's still something that you don't want to necessarily relinquish control and the reins to your children at that point in time. But it requires a balance, though, because maybe they're starting to have children and you want to be able to help your grandchildren, but you also don't want to get in the way of your children being parents to your grandchildren. And so it really does. This is a hard one. And this is one that is definitely different by client and adult child by adult child. I have some clients whose adult children, have gotten into financial problems in the past and purposely, specifically want to keep money out of their hands, versus other parents and children who are doing really well, or maybe they're a teacher and they're getting through life and living paycheck to paycheck, but you want them to be able to go on that vacation and not be so constrained by their salary. And in those situations, we've recommended maybe carving off a portion of a trust and giving them some amount of money, or finding other ways to alleviate the financial pressures that they have, such as perhaps setting up a college fund for your grandchildren, and letting your children know that you will cover the college expenses for their children, and alleviating things in that way. And so, the other aspect of this, and I'll circle back to kind of where I started in terms of shaping your values at this point in time in your life and your children's life. Hopefully you have had a chance to understand and define what your values are, and have had a chance to work with us on thinking through the various topics, because now it starts to become passing on a legacy, your legacy, and wanting to, if you're charitably inclined, if you're giving to certain organizations, having these things become evident and clear, so that after your death, your children can carry on your legacy, and carry on your values and what's important to you. And so it does become important to talk to your kids about money at this point in time, but still handling it cautiously, because as long as you're alive and able to think and make your own decisions, we would recommend you kind of maintaining some level of control over the finances. So it really is this balancing act of how much control to retain, how much to pass on to your kids, and certainly an area that varies significantly. So one that we would certainly recommend speaking to us. We're happy to advise you on it, because it's one that feels like is appropriate to just share everything with your grown, responsible children. But it can potentially go wrong, and there are definitely thoughtful ways to approach this. So this is almost a little bit harder to approach than with younger children, where the advice is almost the same across all 3 to 7-year-olds, versus grown adults who have already established some values. So definitely a harder area, and perhaps you're right. It might deserve its own webinar at some point in time. But feel free to reach out with any questions.
Yeah, it definitely depends on family dynamics, the stage of life your children are in, regardless of their age. And I also think values can certainly help navigate those discussions, especially as it gets more complex with adults. So thank you, Justin, for all of those thoughtful comments. Our next question here is, what if my child isn't interested in learning about finance? I love this one because finance certainly isn't everyone's cup of tea. Obviously, we all enjoy it. We're in the industry. But Mimi, can you walk us through some strategies here?
Sure. And we see this a lot, particularly at teens on up into young adults and later. And what we recommend is, it doesn't have to be finance or investments. It can be an interest that they have. Maybe it's a nonprofit. Maybe it's a cause that they care a lot about. And what we recommend is having conversations around, for example, how the nonprofit might work, how it might be financed. How do you measure what your donations are doing and how they should be evaluated, right? And that's sort of parallel to how you think about investing, but it allows them to engage in some of the similar concepts around thinking very carefully, analyzing where they're putting their money or spending their time or whatever it is that their particular cause is. And then thinking about metrics as they go into it. What are their goals? How are they going to evaluate that? And sometimes that actually naturally leads into financial conversations. But it also helps them think about the questions and get in the right mindset that will translate nicely when they are the stewards of the wealth. They've at least done due diligence, they've done analysis and measuring and so forth. And I also think sometimes that comes from just a fear that we use a lot of acronyms in our industry. It's overwhelming. So I think if engaging in conversations with us or with other people who on these topics, the more we can make it natural, comfortable, and be a place where all questions are welcome, I think that really helps too, because sometimes it's not a lack of interest, it's intimidation. So a couple of strategies that work.
You're so right, that intimidation factor. And I think being able to open up the conversation with advisors and getting to know them is such a great solution there. I also like the idea of connecting financial lessons to their areas of interest, whether it's shopping, gaming, or something that they're saving for. So thank you, Mimi, for that. Our next question here, PJ, I'm going to pass this one on to you. What should I do if my child is overspending or getting into debt?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tricky because especially as kids get into college, they're able to sign up for credit cards, without any real parental oversight. So I personally know somebody that in college got into a lot of credit card debt, kind of buried their head in the sand, and eventually had to kind of go to their parents and say, I'm in trouble, right? So kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with communication, right? Having all those open lines of communication. But at the end of the day, it's a learning experience, right? So making mistakes is part of life. And, your child should know, okay, this is a really valuable lesson that you've learned and you can apply it to the rest of your life. And here are some, tools for maybe helping you navigate this difficult topic, right? And to me, maybe it's just the way I learn, but to me, like helping them set up a spreadsheet where you track your spending and you look at a budget and what have you got coming in, what have you got going out, and to kind of have that like visual representation of the flow of money, I think can be really helpful. But at the end of the day, it's a learning experience, and it's something that it can be a little traumatic when the child is going through it, but hopefully they make their mistakes when the stakes are a lot lower, and it helps them through the rest of life.
Thanks, PJ. I love that idea of using it as a learning moment, and certainly practicing good budgeting habits can help alleviate this. So our next question, Justin, this one's for you. How much financial information should I share with my kids? I know we talked about this a little bit earlier with the idea that disclosure doesn't have to equal dollar amounts, but what would you suggest here?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that I would say evolves and changes a little bit over time. And as for example, as your children are grown, and perhaps as you're getting older, it becomes more important to get into the more specifics and the details, so that when you pass on, it's not kind of a black box in terms of what your wealth is and what the inheritance is. So definitely at that end of the spectrum, you really want to be sharing a lot of the information to make it easier, after your passing. And the other end of the spectrum, we talked early on, you don't want to share too much. And so really the challenge is, how does that evolve over time in terms of opening the kimono and talking more about each of these things? And I think it goes hand in hand with a lot of the things that we've been discussing in terms of getting your children to be fiscally responsible, understanding the value of money, and talking through things of this. And as your children are getting older, and as you're naturally speaking with them about these topics, again, I would put it at the point of view from their point of view. They don't need to know how much money you have, because that doesn't really impact them, or it's not necessarily important to them other than for, personal curiosity. But how much money do they need? How much money do they need for, if they live in New York City versus, if they're living, another lower cost state or city, and looking to pay for a down payment, and maybe you can afford it, maybe you can't afford it, and discussing with them the importance of them working. So this is something that certainly evolves over time. And I would certainly recommend taking your child's lead. Don't so much take it from your point of view, but take it from your child's point of view. And what is it that they need to know? Of course, they're going to be curious and wanting to know a lot of things, but they certainly don't need to know all of those things. And as they get older, that need to know starts to expand. And so it's certainly something that evolves over time, and will also vary child by child, and personal preference by personal preference.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I feel like disclosure really happens on a continuum. You start with financial literacy concepts, instilling those family values, and then as you build those building blocks, you can get into more detail around the actual estate plan and where accounts are, etc. So thank you. All right, another question here. Mimi, I'm going to pass this one to you. How do I make financial discussions a natural part of family life?
It's a good question, and I think natural is probably the right word. I talked earlier about modeling and having conversations in front of them, just making sure it's a norm to have these conversations out in the open. And but I think involving them, asking their opinion, and really seeking to learn as opposed to just pretending that they're part of the conversation. I'm often surprised by what not just my kids, but kids of clients come up with, and they really have perspectives to add as we consider investments or strategies or other things. So really engage them in a genuine way, get their perspective, and then get them involved in shaping, whether it's investment policy or at the younger age, having them, if it's a lemonade stand, having them go to actually buy the ingredients, right? It's lemonade stands don't just appear for them and disappear, but having them involved in those decisions. So I think it's a genuine involvement will really lead to making it more natural. And I also think making it very comfortable for them to ask any questions. We often make presumptions that children understand topics that are common knowledge to us, but maybe aren't to them. So really clarifying, first of all, not just the acronyms, but just the terms that we use in our industry, and making it comfortable for them to ask us, what does that mean, what you just said? So I think really engaging and making it just a normal thing to talk about around the dinner table or just at home is really important.
Thank you, Mimi. Wonderful perspectives there. And I think we have time for at least one more question. So PJ, going to pass the baton to you. When should I start talking to my children about money? Obviously, we've talked about a couple of different age ranges today, but when truly is the best time to start?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, there's no age that's too young. I mean, because you can find ways to incorporate, playing games with money where, we're gonna play checkers and winner gets $1. So you start to kind of find ways to talk about it. Kids will naturally get interested in money. So rather than push it to the side, I think, finding ways to engage your children, keep them curious, keep them asking questions, and trying to help them understand how the world works. I think, it's truly a lifelong learning process because of the fact that you can get more complex throughout. And so, as Mimi was saying, you want to make it part of the natural conversation. And the way I think about it is like, you want to talk about money, but you don't want to make everything about money, right? So it's that finding that balance and having it be something that they feel comfortable asking questions about, but it's not, oh, how much money does so-and-so have? How much money does my friend over here have? And so it's not how we measure, worth or value, but it is an important thing to keep as part of the natural flow of life.
Yeah, PJ, I'm so glad you brought that up. I think framing discussions as positive dialogues is so important because you don't want your children to build a negative connotation around money. You want them to understand that it's simply a tool that's going to help them achieve their goals in life. So great points there. And thank you everyone for your expertise, and to our audience for sharing these questions today. Justin, I'm going to pass it over to you to close us out for the evening.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you all for taking the time, and thank you to the panelists and Charlotte for moderating this. This was really a great discussion, and an exciting one for us to prepare for. It was one that, it's interesting when in traditional financial planning, when you're sitting down with clients, talking to them about retirement planning and asset management and all of the traditional financial planning matters, talking to your children about money isn't necessarily, on that list. But as of course, every one of our clients who are parents are thinking about this all the time. And so it became apparent to us, over the years, that this is a topic that should be on the list. And in speaking with more and more clients about this area, and finding that level of interest, and finding that yearning for more support and help, and resources, it became something that we continue to evolve. And as I mentioned, we've had direct conversations with young children, and older children, and have prepared various presentations to talk through all of that. And so we're happy to take this offline and work directly with you, and also just having this webinar and being able to get out to a larger audience, and making this a purposeful topic for us to talk about is really an analogous to the conversations that you should be having with your children. And while it's something that can seem like it's something in the background or not necessarily on the list of things to talk about, it's something that everybody's thinking about, and it's certainly on kids' minds. As certainly as they get older, they're thinking about money more and more. So really, getting rid of that money is taboo mindset, and really finding ways to talk about it, finding ways to get comfortable talking about things on a day-to-day basis. It really makes a difference in your children and their morals, and having them understand what's important to them. And it could lead to more financially responsible children. It could lead to better preservation of family wealth, foster responsible decision making. And one that I harp on a lot is just helping to build and create your legacy. And it's something that, a lot of times people might not think top of mind, but our clients have amassed a wealth that is going to pass on for future generations. And that's a wonderful thing to pass on. And wouldn't it be, just as wonderful to pass on the values that have allowed you to amass that wealth, and pass that wealth on in a way that helps your children and future generations in the best way possible. And we've worked alongside families, across generations, helping them navigate these conversations at various levels. So, as mentioned, if you'd like to explore these topics further, please reach out to us offline. Whether it's helping you develop a long-term strategy for these discussions, working directly with your children, sitting down and working with you on that worksheet that I referenced earlier to help you define your values. You should see us as a resource. We're here to help you with anything that we can. So please reach out to your advisor or our family office team for further discussions. And thank you again for your time today. And we look forward to more conversations like this in the future. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Charlotte, for some final housekeeping items.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And yes, just a few housekeeping items before we let you go for the evening. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have questions after the webinar today, please give us a call, or contact your advisor. As Justin mentioned, we are here and happy to help, and we're well equipped to help you with these conversations and navigating various family dynamics. And in addition to a recording of the webinar today, we're also going to be in touch with an array of resources to support you as you start having these conversations at home. So keep an eye out for those as well. We're hoping to have the recording available for you by early next week. But with all of that in mind, that brings us to the end of today's session. So thank you everyone again, and a huge thank you to all of our panelists. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to hosting more sessions with you in the future. Have a wonderful evening.